The storm had left the sky looking like bruised steel when Calder Shaw rode into Dust Ridge Crossing, his coat stiff with trail dust and his horse walking slow, ribs showing through the hide. For most men, this town was a stop for whiskey and cards. For Calder, it was a stop for nails, kerosene, and quiet. He'd been living alone for 7 years, ever since the winter his wife and son were buried under the same stone behind his cabin. The war had taken half his hearing. Grief had taken the rest of him. What stayed was duty, patching fences, tending stock, keeping the land alive so it didn't forget his name. He meant to be in and out before sundown. But when he reached the square, he heard shouting, the kind of laughter that came from men who'd run out of mercy. A crowd circled the old freight yard. Curiosity made him turn his horse that way. But what he saw froze him harder than the wind ever could. A woman stood on the flatbed of a wagon. Wrists shackled, dress torn, eyes unflinching. Her hair was the color of raven wings, tangled by dust and rain. But her chin was high. She didn't cry, didn't plead, only stared past the men like they were ghosts. "She's the last one," a man barked. Sheriff Harlan Pike, thick-necked, proud of his cruelty. Half-breed trouble. Can't be left wandering. Any man need a hand on his ranch. Bid now, or she'll be turned over to the chain gang by sundown. Laughter rippled through the square. Calder sat still in the saddle. His jaw worked once. He knew that look in her eyes, the look of someone who'd already survived the worst and wouldn't give strangers the satisfaction of seeing fear. He could ride on. He told himself he would. But when Pike struck the wagon rail with his baton and she didn't flinch, something in Calder's chest moved. Something that hadn't since the day he buried his family. "How much?" His voice came out low, rough from disuse. The sheriff turned, grinning. "For her, you sure, Shaw? She ain't trained, ain't tamed, and ain't got a tongue for English." "How much?" Pike named a price too high for any ranch hand, too low for a life. Calder dismounted, pulled a small leather pouch from his coat, and placed every coin he had in the sheriff's hand. The iron key turned. The shackles fell. The woman rubbed nothing, just stared at Calder, measuring him. "You want a bill of sale?" The sheriff sneered. No, that one word turned a few heads. Calder didn't care. He walked back to his horse, slow and steady, the way men did when they'd already decided something that might ruin them. The woman followed, barefoot, silent. Not because he asked, because staying put wasn't safer. When they reached the edge of town, he lifted a hand toward the wagon. "Climb up," he said. She hesitated, then obeyed, sitting straight-backed beside him, her shackled wrists bleeding where iron had rubbed skin raw. Calder reached into his saddlebag and offered a piece of linen, the edge of an old shirt. She took it without a word, wrapping her wrists. "Name's Calder," he said quietly. She looked at him once, sharp and unreadable. "Nila," she whispered. Voice cracked, barely there. Neither spoke again. As the wagon rolled toward the fading horizon, the town disappeared behind them. Its noise, its cruelty, its dust. Ahead lay miles of open land, and a silence so wide it could drown 2 broken souls or teach them to breathe again. And for the first time in years, Calder Shaw didn't feel entirely alone. The wagon's wheels sang the same rough rhythm for hours before Calder spoke again. The sky above Dust Ridge bled into violet, the color the land wore before it decided whether to be night or storm. Nila hadn't moved except to wrap the torn cloth tighter around her wrists. She watched the desert the way soldiers watched horizons, seeing everything, fearing nothing they could name. Calder had seen that look in mirrors after the war. A face made of guardrails. When they reached the ridge that split his valley from the town, the wind turned colder. The road narrowed between sandstone teeth and then spilled into open range. Calder's land. Fences leaning, roof lines tired, but still standing. He stopped the wagon near the well and climbed down. "You can rest inside," he said. She didn't answer. The cabin door gave a low groan when he pushed it open. Inside was one large room divided by a short plank wall. Stove on one side, his bed on the other. A smaller cot near the fire where his boy had once slept. The smell of cedar smoke clung to everything. Nila stepped in, eyes moving like they were mapping a new country. Her shoulders stiffened when she saw a carved wooden horse on the shelf. Calder caught her glance and quietly moved it aside. He set a kettle on the stove, poured her water from the bucket by the door. "You're safe here," he said. She looked at him then. Really looked, as if measuring truth in the way a man breathed. "Safe?" she said, her accent flattening the word. "That means no chain?" "No chain," Calder answered. "No debt." She stared a long time before she sat down by the fire. The flames threw gold along her cheekbones, catching the faint tremor in her fingers. She held them close to the heat until her palms stopped shaking. Calder busied himself with chores he didn't need to do. Straightening the shelf, adjusting a lantern wick, splitting 2 logs that could have waited until morning. Anything to fill the quiet. When he finally sat at the table, he said, "There's food. Dried beef and beans. You eat first." Nila's eyes flicked from him to the pot, unsure whether it was a test. Then she rose, ladled stew into a tin bowl, and knelt on the floor to eat. Every motion careful, silent. Halfway through, she stopped and said, "Why you do this?" Calder thought about answering with something simple. Because it was right. But he was tired of simple lies. "Because I couldn't stand there," he said. "Men forget what mercy looks like." Nila studied him for a moment, then gave the smallest nod, as if storing the answer away. After supper, he set an extra blanket on the cot. "You can sleep there. Door doesn't lock." She looked from the cot to the main door, then back at him. "You keep key." "I don't even have one." That night, they didn't speak again. Calder lay awake listening to the wind press against the shutters, hearing her light footsteps as she turned on the cot, not sleeping either. 2 strangers learning how to share silence without fear. Morning came with the metallic smell of rain. Calder was already outside chopping wood when he noticed her standing in the doorway, his coat hanging loosely around her shoulders. Bare feet, hair braided back, eyes cautious but awake. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. She didn't drink it, but watched him swing the axe, each strike echoing through the hollow valley. After a while, she stepped forward, picked up a smaller log, and held it steady while he split it. When he paused, she motioned toward the pasture. "Work?" he nodded. "Fence needs mending." They walked the line together, wire in hand, boots sinking into wet clay. Nila worked with silent precision, twisting wire, hammering stakes. She didn't wait for instruction. She already knew the rhythm of labor. By noon, Calder's palms were blistered, and she hadn't stopped once. He finally called a break. They sat under a mesquite tree, sharing a canteen. "You done this before," he said. "My father kept horses," she replied. "Before..." She didn't finish. "Before the war?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Before men came." He let the quiet cover the rest. Back at the cabin, rain started to fall in soft, steady sheets. Inside, the fire hissed as drops struck the chimney. Nila stood near the window, watching water thread down the glass. "You can wash," Calder said. "Barrel's warm from the stove." She nodded, unbuttoning the coat. When she lifted the basin, her sleeve fell back, revealing scars from rope and metal. Calder looked away. She noticed. "You don't have to hide your eyes," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm not hiding," he answered. "Just giving you peace." She studied him again. that searching gaze that never quite softened, but no longer accused. Peace, she repeated quietly, tasting the word like it was new. Later, when she'd finished and the rain eased, she sat near the fire brushing her long hair with her fingers. Calder repaired a saddle strap, pretending not to watch the lamplight play along her face. "You lost someone," she said. "Yes." "Wife?" He nodded. "And a boy." She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she said, "Then we both know ghosts." Calder met her eyes. "Maybe that's why we're still breathing, to make sure they rest." A tiny curve touched the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but close. That night, she chose the cot again, though he'd built a small divider for her privacy. Before lying down, she hesitated and said softly, "Thank you, Calder." He turned from the window, surprised to hear his name shaped by her voice. "You're welcome, Nila." The lamp dimmed. Outside, thunder rolled far away, like memory retreating. Inside, the cabin held a different kind of silence, no longer empty, only waiting. And as Calder lay staring at the rafters, he realized the strange truth of it. For the first time in years, he wasn't dreading tomorrow. He was curious to see what morning would bring. By the third day, the sun came back fierce and bright, painting the wet fields gold. The land smelled of iron and sage, the kind of scent that made a man believe in starting over. Calder woke early, same as always. The first thing he saw when he stepped outside was Nila, kneeling near the corral fence, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a strip of twine. She was sketching something in the dirt with a stick. A set of symbols, loops, and marks he didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Wind," she said. "When it changes, it writes itself on the sand. My father taught me to read it." He crouched beside her. "You can tell direction from that? And storm, if you pay attention." She pointed toward the horizon, where faint dust plumes twisted low. "Bad wind comes from that side by evening. You'll want to move the cattle uphill." Calder blinked, impressed. He'd lived here half his life and still trusted instinct more than reading wind. "You sure?" Nila gave a small, knowing smile. "The sky doesn't lie." He studied her then. Not just her skill, but her quiet confidence. There was something luminous in the way she moved, as if every gesture came from thought, not fear. He nodded. "All right then. We'll move them." They spent the morning together, driving cattle toward higher ground. Nila handled the herd like she'd done it for years, whistling sharp, waving her arms, reading each animal's mood. When one young steer balked, she spoke softly to it in her language, a rhythm that calmed even Calder's horse. He couldn't help watching her as they worked. The wind tugged at her hair, sunlight catching along the copper in her skin. She looked alive in a way the land seemed to respond to, like the two belonged to the same breath. When the last steer was corralled, Calder said, "You handle them better than most men I've hired." Her reply was simple. "I listen." "To what?" "Them, the wind, you." That last word slipped out, light but sure. She didn't blush. Calder did. By midday, clouds gathered again, the kind that promised lightning more than rain. Calder worked on mending the wagon axle, while Nila disappeared inside the cabin. When she returned, she carried his old saddlebag, now neatly mended and oiled. "You fixed that?" he asked. She nodded. "The stitching was wrong before. I used double thread. Won't tear again." He ran a hand over the repair, testing it. "Perfect." "You sew leather?" "My mother did. She said if your hands can't fight, they should make things last." "Smart woman," he said. Nila's eyes softened. She was. They shared a quiet moment before thunder cracked across the valley, shaking the barn roof. By dusk, the wind turned mean, just as Nila predicted. Calder pulled tarps over the feed bins while she tied down tools. The sky burned a wild red before the first drops hit. Inside, the cabin glowed warm from the fire. Nila brushed her wet hair dry with her fingers, her movements easy, graceful. Calder poured her coffee, noticing how her eyes caught the firelight, deep brown, flecked with gold. "You read wind," he said. "Anything else you know how to read?" Nila smiled faintly. "Faces. Yours is harder than the sky." He laughed softly. "And what's it say?" "That you hide kindness like a secret," she said. "But it leaks through your eyes." He looked down, embarrassed but warmed. "You talk like a poet." "I talk like someone who had to watch before she spoke." That silenced him more than the thunder. Later that night, the storm hit full. Rain hammered the roof like thrown stones. Wind rattled the shutters. A branch cracked outside, slamming against the wall. Calder rose, grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside," he said. Nila followed him anyway. "If something comes, you shouldn't face it alone." The barn door banged open, revealing nothing but rain. Calder cursed, running to secure it. Nila held the lantern high, steady despite the wind tearing her shawl loose. Her hair whipped around her face like a banner. When they finally latched the door, both were soaked through. She turned to him, rain shining on her skin, breath fast but controlled. "You don't listen well," he said. "I told you. I listen when it matters," she answered, smiling through the downpour. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The storm, the thunder, the world. He looked at her the way men look at light after too much dark. Back inside, they hung their wet clothes by the fire. Calder turned away to give her privacy, but she spoke softly. "You think I'm a burden?" "No," he said immediately. Her eyes searched his. "Then what am I here?" He hesitated. "Someone trying to start again, same as me." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Then maybe we help each other not drown?" He nodded, unsure what else to say. As the storm quieted, Nila sat cross-legged by the fire, running her fingers along a cracked, leather-bound book he'd kept on the shelf. "You can read?" he asked, surprised. She nodded. "A missionary taught me when I was a child. The words stay, even when people don't." "What are you reading?" She smiled gently. "Your notes. You wrote them on the margins, about harvests, about the years you lost your crop." He blinked. "Didn't think anyone would understand my handwriting." "I do," she said. "You write like you build fences, strong, but lonely." Her insight caught him off guard. "You see too much," he murmured. "I only see what people try to hide," she replied. "You hide your heart in work. I used to do the same with silence." The fire snapped between them, sending sparks dancing. Calder leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And what do you see now?" Nila looked at him, truly looked, and her voice lowered to a whisper. "A man learning to live again." The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was alive with something unspoken, but undeniable. That night, Calder couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in the firelight, the curve of her smile when she spoke about the wind. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The sheriff might come looking, or the past might find a way to bite. But he knew this much. Nila wasn't a shadow in his home anymore. She was light, and whether it burned or healed, he couldn't turn away. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving the air sharp with cedar and smoke. The hills shimmered under a thin veil of mist, and every puddle carried the sky like a secret. Calder woke to the sound of Nila humming, a low, unfamiliar tune that moved through the cabin like breath. She stood near the hearth, hair loose and damp, stirring the ashes back to life. When she turned, the soft light touched her face, and for a moment Calder forgot how to speak. "You were talking in your sleep," she said quietly. "Was I?" "You said a name." He looked down. "My wife." Nila nodded once. No jealousy in her eyes, only understanding. "You loved her?" "Yes." "Then she taught you how." The words landed with a weight he hadn't expected. He smiled, small and sad. You have a way of saying things that sound like truth, whether I'm ready or not. Truth doesn't wait, she answered, pouring water into the kettle. It only asks that we stop running. Later that morning, they rode the fence line to check for damage. The storm had torn down a gate, scattered rails across the field. Nila knelt in the mud beside him, sleeves rolled up, eyes bright with focus. She tied wire with a quick, clever twist that saved half the time. "Where'd you learn that knot?" he asked. "My father," she said. "He said a strong knot is a promise. You can pull, you can strain, but it won't break if you meant it." Calder glanced at her hands, small, scarred, graceful, and wondered how something so delicate could hold so much strength. When she looked up, their eyes caught and neither moved. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged, alive. A wind passed through the grass, lifting strands of her hair across her cheek. Calder reached out without thinking and brushed them aside. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but the contact sent a pulse through both of them. Gentle, undeniable. Nila's breath hitched. She didn't look away. "Thank you," she murmured. He dropped his hand, suddenly aware of the space between them. "You should rest," he said gruffly. "I'm not tired," she replied. "Not when the air feels like this." By afternoon, the sky cleared to a hard, beautiful blue. They returned to the cabin, laughter still hanging in the air from a small joke about the mule refusing to cross puddles. It was the first time Calder had laughed in years, and it startled them both. Inside, Nila found the old violin his wife had once tried to play. The bowstrings were loose, but she tuned them gently, coaxing out a trembling note. The sound filled the room, soft, fragile, human. "I didn't know you played," he said. "I don't," she smiled. "But I remember songs. Music doesn't belong to instruments. It belongs to hearts that still want to hear." The melody wove between them, thin at first, then stronger, as if the cabin itself remembered joy. Calder moved closer, drawn by the music and by her. When she stopped, his hand lingered at her shoulder. "You've turned this place into something it hasn't been in a long time," he said. "What's that?" "Alive." She looked up at him, eyes luminous, lashes still wet from the rain. "You did that, Calder. You gave it back." Their nearness felt natural, inevitable. The fire cracked once, the sound startling and sweet. He lifted a hand, fingertips tracing the line of her hair where it curled against her neck. "Tell me," he whispered, "if this is wrong." "It isn't," she said, voice trembling but sure. He bent toward her slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their foreheads touched first, breath mingling, the smallest space between them alive, with everything unsaid. Then her hand rose to his chest, feeling the slow, solid beat beneath. "You're not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Not of this," he answered. Their lips met, light at first, then deeper, a question turning into understanding. It wasn't hunger. It was recognition. Two people who had carried too much silence, learning to speak again through touch. When they parted, Nila's fingers stayed on his jaw, tracing the faint stubble there. "You still think I'm cursed?" He shook his head. "You're the proof I'm not." Night settled over Dust Ridge. They ate little, speaking in murmurs, laughter threading softly between words. The world outside felt far away. No sheriff, no rumor, no past. Just the hum of crickets and the heartbeat of the fire. At one point she reached for his hand across the table. "You saved me," she said. He squeezed gently. "No, Nila. You reminded me why people are worth saving." She leaned closer, her voice a breath. "Then we save each other." The wind outside sighed through the cracks of the cabin like a blessing. Later, when the lamps burned low, Calder sat by the window while Nila brushed her hair near the fire. The glow turned every strand to copper, every motion graceful. He turned, watching her without shame this time, only quiet wonder. "You're staring," she said softly, teasing. "I've earned the right," he answered. Her laugh was quiet, full of warmth. "Then come sit by me," he did. The fire cast their shadows together on the wall. Neither spoke again. The world had narrowed to the space between heartbeats, to warmth shared without fear. When the flames finally dwindled to embers, Calder reached for her hand. Their fingers wove together like roots, finding water after a long drought. And in that stillness, where every breath carried both memory and promise, the loneliness that had once haunted the ranch slipped quietly out into the night and did not return. The next morning broke wide and gold, the kind of dawn that made even an old roof look new. The storm had washed everything clean, the fences, the air, even the ache in Calder's bones. For the first time in years, he woke with warmth beside him and peace in his chest. Nila was already up, standing on the porch wrapped in his old blanket. Her hair, unbound, caught the sun like black fire. She turned when he stepped outside. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he echoed. He wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words big enough for what he felt. She nodded toward the pasture. "The land breathes different today." "It does," he smiled. "So do I." They spent the day working together as if they'd done it all their lives. Mending rails, feeding stock, laughing at the stubborn mule that refused to move without her voice coaxing him. At noon, she took the empty feed bucket and flipped it upside down, sitting on it like a queen on a throne. "I was thinking," she said. "That sounds dangerous." She smirked. "You risked your life for me. Let me risk an idea for you." He leaned against the post. "I'm listening. You should take the cattle to market next week. Trade what you can. Start again proper. We could build a bigger house, add a roof that doesn't leak when the rain remembers us." He chuckled. "We, huh?" Nila's eyes shone with mischief and warmth. "If you'll have me." He stepped closer, brushing a thumb along her cheek. "You think I could ever have peace again without you?" She leaned into his touch. "Then we build it together." But peace, like the weather, never lasted long on that ridge. 3 nights later, just before dusk, the sound of hooves carried up from the valley. Calder went to the porch, rifle in hand. The silhouettes of 3 riders climbed the slope, one lantern swinging, one carrying a badge that glinted even in the fading light. Nila came to stand beside him, calm but ready. "It's Pike again," Calder said. She met his gaze. "Then it ends tonight." The riders pulled up near the well. Pike dismounted, his mouth twisted in a smirk. "Evenin', Shaw. Heard you been harboring a fugitive. Thought I'd check if the rumors had teeth." "Turn around," Calder said flatly. Pike laughed. "Come now, I ain't here for trouble. Just for what's mine." He looked past Calder toward Nila. "You remember me, don't you, girl? You're the property of the county, and I've got the papers to prove it." "She's no one's property," Calder growled. "Then she's your ruin." Pike cocked his gun. Before Calder could move, Nila stepped forward, her chin high. "You think power comes from owning what's already broken?" she said. "But I was never yours to break." Her voice carried like wind through canyon stone, steady, echoing, unstoppable. Pike hesitated, unsettled. Calder raised his rifle. "You have 2 choices. Ride back to town or stay here forever." One of Pike's men shifted in the saddle, uneasy. "Sheriff, maybe let it be." "Shut your mouth," Pike snapped. Nila's eyes flashed. "He won't. He only knows how to bark." Pike snarled and raised his weapon. But the moment stretched, balanced on the edge of something divine. Calder didn't flinch. Nila didn't blink. Then Pike's hand trembled. The gun slipped in the rain-slick air, fired wild, and the bullet buried itself harmlessly into the barn door. Before he could recover, Calder shot once, clean, sharp, precise. The rifle cracked like thunder, and Pike's hat flew off as the bullet grazed his temple. He dropped to the mud, stunned, alive, but stripped of power. His men bolted, spooked by the echo. Nila stood still, watching the sheriff struggle to his knees. "You don't belong to this land anymore," she said. "It remembers kindness, not cruelty." Pike stared up at her, bleeding pride more than blood. He spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," she said, "but at least it'll be mine to regret." He mounted his horse with shaking hands and rode off into the darkness, his shadow shrinking with every hoofbeat. When the silence came back, it was thick and holy. Calder lowered the rifle. "It's done," he said. Nila exhaled, trembling now that the danger had passed. He reached for her hand. She gripped his tightly, grounding herself. "You should hate this place," he whispered. "It's brought you nothing but pain." Her voice was quiet but sure. "It also brought you." He pulled her close then, his forehead resting against hers. The firelight from the cabin window flickered over them like a benediction. "Stay," he said. "Not because you owe me, because I can't imagine breathing without you anymore." She smiled through tears. "You think I'm still waiting to be told to stay?" And then she kissed him. Not desperate, but certain. A vow sealed in warmth and breath. It was the kind of kiss that didn't erase the past, but folded it gently into the present, turning pain into promise. Days turned to weeks. Spring arrived in soft colors, wildflowers climbing the fence rails, birds nesting near the eaves. The town heard rumors, as towns always do, but no one came again. Calder and Nila built a life from the wreckage of their histories. She repaired the roof with her clever hands. He carved her a chair by the window where she liked to watch the horizon. They spoke little, loved deeply, worked side by side. One morning, as the first light touched the valley, Nila stood barefoot in the doorway, watching him hitch the wagon. "You heading into town?" she asked. He nodded. "To sell cattle, to buy what we need." She stepped closer. "And if they ask about me," he smiled, "I'll tell them I met a woman the earth itself made for this land. And I was lucky enough she decided to stay." She laughed softly, reaching up to fix his collar. "You're learning to speak pretty." "Had a good teacher," he said. When he rode out, Nila stayed on the porch, the wind lifting her hair, the hills glowing like a promise around her. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered a single word in her language, a word that meant home. In the distance, Calder turned once and lifted his hand, and as the sun rose full over Dust Ridge Crossing, its light fell across their cabin, the well, the fence lines, all of it alive again. The ghosts were gone. The land had chosen them, and this time, love would stay. Years later, the valley still tells their story in the quiet way land remembers what matters. When the wind crosses Dust Ridge at dusk, it carries the scent of cedar smoke and wild sage. The same mix that once drifted through a cabin window where two souls learned how to begin again. They say Calder Shaw never left that ridge again, and that the woman called Nila turned his silence into music. Some evenings, travelers swear they hear her voice, soft, humming the tune she once played on a half-broken violin, woven with the sound of cattle bells far off in the dark. No one remembers the sheriff's name anymore. Cruel men fade quick in a place that values mercy over noise. But the fence posts Calder and Nila set still stand, silvered by rain, sturdy as the promise they made without words. Love didn't come to them like lightning. It came like morning light, slow, honest, impossible to stop. Two hearts that had been cut apart by the world found a way to fit again, rough edges and all. They didn't escape their past. They forgave it by living, and when spring sweeps through the high country now, it pauses on that old patch of land, the one with the leaning cabin and the whispering well. The wind rests there a moment before it moves on, as if paying its respects to the kind of love that no law could buy, no storm could drown, and no time could erase. Oh, because every man and woman who ever walked alone beneath a hard sky deserves to know. You can still be found, even after the world thinks it's finished with you. All it takes is one open door, one offered hand, and the courage to stay.